Should we queue up the PowerPoint?
Let me share that right now.
Is that any more people coming in, Katie?
No, so far it looks like everyone's filtered in from the waiting room. Are you able to see the full screen of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
So I'll go ahead and get started then. Good afternoon, everybody. At this time, we're going to start the public meeting for the PRC 421 Decommissioning Project Draft Environmental Impact Report. It's February 10th, 2022 at 2 p.m., a little after 2. Welcome and thank you for your interest in this project. My name is Eric Gillis. I'm the Assistant Chief in the Environmental Planning and Management Division of the California State Lands Commission. As lead agency, we have prepared a draft environmental impact report, or EIR, for this project in compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. Next slide, please. All of you joining the Zoom meeting will currently see a slide showing notes of the format of the meeting. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. We have a presentation to share with you describing the project, contents of the EIR. When the presentation is complete, we'll give more detailed instructions on how to comment in Zoom or by phone, and then open the meeting to public comments. Next slide, please. Our agenda includes introductions and the purpose of this meeting, contents of the draft EIR, and receipt of public comments that are delivered today. Evening meetings have the same agenda and presentation. We'll have another meeting at 6 o'clock tonight. The State Lands Commission has prepared the draft EIR for this project with the assistance of Padre and Associates. The Commission is working with ExxonMobil as they will be carrying out the project decommissioning of the piers and caissons. There's a joint review panel for this project made up of State Lands, the City of Goleta, and the California Coastal Commission. With me on the Zoom panel from State Lands is Joe Fable from our legal division, Jeff Plank and Peter Reagan from our Mineral Resource Management Division. We also have Jen Layton and Simon Poulter of Padre Associates, who will be presenting the contents of the EIR. Our Zoom host is Katie Robinson Phillip. Next slide, please. The purpose of the meeting is to obtain agency public input, comment on the project, and environmental analysis covered in the EIR. We will be accepting comments, but not engaging in extensive question and answer sessions at this meeting. Comments can also be provided by email or letter through March 7th. I'll have more on that later. Next slide, please. CEQA applies discretionary approval from a state or local agency. Preparation of an EIR is required when evidence indicates that proposed project could have potential significant impacts on the environment. Next slide. This slide shows the EIR process, beginning with the notice of preparation that was released last June. It was followed by preparing the draft EIR, then released for public review on January 21st. And now the public comment, or the public meeting for public comment. Next, we'll be receiving comments on the draft EIR, preparing responses to comments that will be provided in the EIR, final EIR, and taking the final EIR to the commission meeting for certification scheduled for April 26th. Next slide. And now I want to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Simon Poulter, and he'll present the draft EIR overview.
Thank you, Eric. As Eric indicated, I'm joined here by Jen Layton, who is the project manager for this EIR. I'm a principal with Padre Associates. Both of us work in our Ventura office. Very briefly, a summary of what we will address as far as outlining the EIR that we prepared for the project. We'll include a brief overview of the project description as it was outlined in the document, some alternatives that were evaluated as required by CEQA. We'll also look at the issue areas and the analysis that was done to support the analysis. Significant impacts and beneficial impacts will then be outlined, as well as any mitigations that we've identified. Next slide, please. So the purpose and the need of this project is the final disposition of the 421 pier and associated facilities. These are quite old facilities, constructed back in the 1920s and 30s. More recently, these facilities received a lot of attention while the two wells that were associated with the caissons were finally plugged and abandoned. One was an injection well, the other was an oil production well. And those were completed last year, which now allows us to move into the actual removal of the facilities. Obviously, removal of these piers and caissons has a great potential for benefits to the public due to the elimination of these structures. They have gone through quite the test of time associated with the marine environment and have undergone repairs over the years, but are at a point where there is significant degradation to some of the structure. So next slide, please. Project location, we are located immediately south of the Sandpiper Golf Course. Access to these piers comes from the Elwood onshore facility via the Hollister Avenue. We're located immediately close to the high tide line. In the right-hand picture, you can see the location of the two piers. 421 number 1 pier is located to the slightly north and west of 421 number 2, which is the second pier where the oil well was and recently abandoned. This slide shows the jurisdiction of where state lands high tide line, as well as the approximate tow of the revetment in the area. Next slide, please. We broke the project down into two primary components. Component 1 is the caissons and the piers, which provide access to those piers or to those caissons. And then finally, component 2, which is the access road, some associated pipelines that were in the road, the pier abutments, which supported the piers that lead out to the caissons themselves, and then the associated rock riprap and wooden seawall that supports the road, access road that leads to the piers. You can see in the diagram, we also included an overview of some staging areas where equipment that needs to access the site would potentially occur. Obviously, this site is hard to get to because you only have the one access road, or you have to access it via the beach. We did include one alternative staging area up towards the Bacara, and then also there is a ramp proposed, a temporary ramp that would be down to the beach just as the road starts to parallel the bluff after leaving the golf course. Next slide, please. So component 1, we looked at both staging and access, because obviously that is a concern. As outlined in this picture in the upper right, you can see the roadway that leads to the piers and caissons. So that there would also be that temporary access ramp that I mentioned. The caisson and pier removal would involve heavy equipment associated, similar to what we're seeing in the photograph in the lower left, which was a similar, a caisson of similar design to the ones we're looking at, but a much smaller one that was done as another independent project. Also, as part of component 1, the pipelines would be flushed and finally located to make sure there are no residual hydrocarbons associated with those remaining pipelines. Next slide, please. Component two component, the component one areas. You can see the wellhead here, located in this situation in the caisson number 1. The lower left, you can also see the well and associated well bay in caisson number 2. And then finally, a representative example of the pier structure that will also be removed as part of this component. Next slide, please. Component 2, there are 2 pipelines in the road. There's a 2-inch diameter pipeline and a 6-inch diameter pipeline. That would be removed as part of component 2. And then finally, the road is supported by a wooden wall and associated rock riprap that supports the road. That would also be removed under this component, and then a final restoration to that site to bring it back to a more natural conditions as proposed under this. And you can see in the upper right-hand picture the rock riprap, and of course the wall as seen here just to the east of caisson number 2. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. CEQA requires that in an EIR you look at project alternatives that in concept could reduce the potential impacts that you've identified for the primary projects. We are required to look at the no project alternative regardless of what is being proposed. And then at least for this, we were only able to identify one other alternative, which is a single component abandonment, which would mean the implementation of only component 1, which is the caissons and piers, and we would not address the roadway as part of component 2. Next slide, please. Since the release of the notice of preparation, we did have to undertake a number of studies to take a look at very focused issues that may affect the analysis that we included in the environmental impact report. We did complete an air quality and greenhouse gas emission calculations, which is part of the analysis as required by CEQA and also in compliance with the local air district. Caisson number 2 was observed to support bat habitat, a bat roost. So there was a focused bat survey done to confirm that presence. Wetland delineation report was then prepared. There is a well-documented wetland just immediately adjacent to the caisson number 2, but also there are various locations along the roadway where we observed wetlands. And so that delineation report includes that additional information. A bluff retreat study was done to look at both historical bluff retreat issues in the project area. That study also looked at what would happen with the removal of the caissons themselves, and then also the potential for the removal of the roadway and supporting rock riprap and wall. The diagram we actually are depicting here shows the modeling that was done to show the reflection or shielding that the caissons provide to the areas behind them when waves are coming in on the beach. So this then supported a lot of the geologic analysis that was done in the report. An archaeological survey report was also prepared for the area, including the access areas. We also did a coastal process study, which is in fact the diagram that we've shown here. Again, looking at what would happen to wave action as it approaches the beach, with or without the caissons there, and again without the road. The obvious, and also this report looked at sea level rise. Finally, or the last 2 studies were associated with an assessment of potential contaminants that may occur either in the roadway, in the seawall, or in and around the caissons themselves. And that included drill borings into the roadway to determine if residual hydrocarbons are present in there, and then the asbestos lead based paint assessment of the caissons and the access roadway. Next slide, please. Potential impacts were analyzed for a number of resource areas as defined by the CEQA checklist. The analysis focused on aesthetics, which is the appearance of the site, air quality, which is associated with the demolition activities, biological resources, both inland and marine, cultural resources in association with tribal consultation process, which is part of the CEQA process. We looked at geologic and soil conditions along the project site, greenhouse gas emissions, hazardous materials, and that's consistent with the analysis of the site assessment for potential contamination. Hydrology and water quality. Obviously, the demolition of the caissons have the potential for releasing their contents into the marine water surrounding the area, so we looked at those concerns. Land use and planning regarding policies regarding the removal of these facilities. Noise impacts from the construction activities, since they will involve heavy equipment. Impacts on any public services as far as access and utilities in the area. Obviously, recreation is a big issue due to the public use of the beach surrounding the caissons. Transportation and traffic, because a lot of the materials that will be removed from the caissons will have to be trucked off site. And finally, utilities and services areas. These obviously looked at both the construction or demolition activities as well as the long-term outcomes once the facilities were removed. I will say that all the assessments resulted in impacts that were less than significant. However, a number of areas did require mitigation measures to be proposed. Next slide, please. Beneficial impacts, as were previously identified in the objectives for this project, are associated with water quality, and hydrocarbons are a known contaminant within the caisson themselves, as well as there have been some identified in the access roadway. The removal of those would have the benefit of reducing the potential of the accidental release of those hydrocarbons into the waterway. And then that would also eliminate the threat not only to the marine environment and surrounding environment, but also to the public. Recreational improvements and benefits would be that 0.4 acres of beach area would now be available to the public for public use, and that's associated with both the caissons and their piers that come out to them. Next slide, please. As I indicated, we did identify a number of impacts associated with the project, but we're able to propose mitigations that would address those concerns. Paramount on that was the fact that there is contaminants known to occur within the caissons and somewhat in the roadway. So there are 4 measures that have been put into place to ensure that the contaminants are effectively contained during the demolition. And if there was an accidental release, that there were features in place to address that should that occur. But the primary focus is on prevention, not on response. Aesthetic impacts were really associated with reducing impacts during the demolition phase. This is a very active public use beach, so obviously there will be some disruption to the visual quality of the area. Also, due to the need to work in the surf zone, there may be the requirement to work at night to ensure the availability of the site during low tide cycles, which don't necessarily occur during the day. Air quality mitigations were proposed to address exhaust emissions as well as dust that may be associated with tracked equipment as it moves to and from the site. Resources and mitigation avoidance measures were identified, including monitoring during activities. Not only are the caissons themselves in the marine environment in close proximity to some sensitive resources in the coastal area, but also the access road follows by Bell Creek, which is a known habitat for several endangered species. Tribal and cultural resource concerns are predominantly going to be addressed through education of the work crews to make sure that they're aware of any resources in the area and avoidance measures to ensure no disruptions to those resources. And then finally, a recreational beach access plan, due to the fact that at times the beach will need to be blocked while heavy equipment is working on the two sites. There will be every attempt made to ensure that the public is able to safely move around and around the work site. Next slide, please. Turn it over to Eric for the rest.
All right, thank you, Simon. So this slide provides the current schedule. I provided much of this information in the EIR process. Highlighted that comments on the draft EIR are due Monday, March 7th. We plan to release the final EIR in early April and take the document and consider the project at the April 26th commission hearing. Deconstruction of component 1 would be scheduled for late summer, fall 2022. At this time, there's no funding to implement component 2 and it would require separate permitting. Next slide, please. All right, so before we open it up for comments, this slide provides some Zoom instructions and Katie will then call on speakers. Attendees will be muted until we unmute you. If you'd like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you and we'll call on you to speak. For written comments, you can use the chat feature. If you want to type a comment, click on the chat and type the comment in the chat bar. If you're joining via telephone, press *9 to raise your hand. And when called on, press *6 to unmute. You can also email or mail comments after this meeting by March 7th. So can open up for comments. Katie, can you indicate any hands?
Yes, so far we don't have any hands raised. So again, if you would like to provide a comment, please select the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen and I'll call on you. Okay, there are still no hands raised for comment.
Okay, we'll go ahead and proceed with the rest of the presentation. There's only a couple more slides.
Let me just pull that up back again real quick.
Okay, next slide. All right, this slide provides how to comment after this meeting via email or mail by March 7th. The email is sequa.comments@slc.ca.gov. Please write PRC 421 decommissioning project draft EIR comments in the subject line. Be sure to include your name and contact information so we can add you to the project notification list. For mail, please send to my attention to 100 Howe Avenue, Suite 100 South, Sacramento, California, 95825. We anticipate the next public meeting on this project to be at the commission meeting on April 26th, when the final EIR would be considered for certification and take action on the project. Next slide, please. In the meantime, please contact me with any concerns or questions. This concludes the meeting. As mentioned earlier, the meeting at 6 p.m. tonight will be the same presentation as this one for people that couldn't attend this 2 o'clock meeting. We thank you thank you all with all your interest in this project, your comments, and your attendance. Thank you.